You might have to do what we call the smear.
I think you got both.
Yeah.
So I would probably smear that rock on the porch there. So just touch the end of the tip against the porch. Not sure if that's a rock or a root.
The sponge is in the tube, so we don't need to suck up the
Oh yeah,
rock.
so I'm going to kill the suction there.
That
and,
was
I
perfect.
think we're done.
There we go. There it is.
It is
Right.
Showed up
indeed
in
the jar.
Jar,
We
zoom
got
jar
it.
spun.
Zoom out, please, Wayne.
Zooming out.
And you can stow your weapon.
Wow.
Nicely done.
Okay.
Ah, nice stowage too.
Nice.
Okay, you done with the camera there? You got bubble, so you should be good there to.
All right, thank you. We're ready when you are.
What's that?
We're ready to pull when you are.
Oh, yeah, copy that. You can leave it there for now. We'll have time to play with it on the way up.
Is there any porch maintenance that you guys need to do before we come up? Like the temperature
So,
DO probe or?
yeah, come up. Okay, that's Argus leaving the neighborhood, and Herc will shortly follow.
Herc, your heading is going to be about 175.
Yeah, right. 3 hours to work that out. You can just come up. The current
Bye,
will blow
octopus.
me back where we want to be, so if you start coming up, I'll come around.
So we are ending this dive.
What's that? That's a roger. Let's just start coming up easy for now. 10. Huh,
Bye, seafloor.
getting pulled away.
Don't take us away.
Argus is leaving the neighborhood.
Wait,
I
no,
must
don't
follow.
Go. Don't go. We can
That's
still
all
see
you get.
something. We can still see something.
Don't worry, everybody. We'll be back.
We'll be back.
Deck control.
Maybe I can run up the hill a little while she's.
We've explored this area.
We started our
We've
recovery.
got to have some time to do another dive. What is that?
I don't know.
Roger that.
Coming
Ready up
wide.
if you have a problem.
Full wide.
Roger.
Maybe we'll see some midwater critters on the
Ooh, I
way
want to
up.
see a Phaeodarian.
yes.
What's a Phaeodarian?
Phaeodarian's another protist.
Yeah,
I'm on a
one
little
last
protist.
How
glimpse
big are
as
they?
we-
Can we see it with the camera?
Yeah.
Which one?
They,
I think it's something that's in the water column.
yes.
Oh,
Oh, yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
Let's come wide.
They are in the water column. They are, they look like little orbs. And in the inside, there's a central dot that's orangey white. So it's a,
Yeah, no.
it's a
The size of
Phaeodarian.
a
Is it
small rubber
protist?
ball?
We missed them.
It's kind of looks
If
like
you
a
put-
firefly. It's
If you put your finger and thumb together, it's that size?
a little smaller, but about that. Yeah.
I'm hoping for some large fish.
Okay, you can
Let's
come
go
up a little
find
faster.
out.
That would be
All right.
neat.
No floor for us.
Maybe
You
a
see
shark?
vertebrates? That would be a neat. I'll take a vertebrate in the water column.
Maybe some ratfish? Some sharks?
Phaeodarian.
Let's see what we can find.
Maybe
We're
some
good.
salps? Let's see.
Some salps.
Or
What is a
sea
salp?
pickles.
What are sea pickles?
Sea pickles are pyrosomes.
Oh, you call those sea pickles.
That's their
Sea
common name.
pickles?
I learned. I love that.
That's a great name.
In contrast to sea cucumbers, which are completely different.
We have
Yeah.
sea pickles.
So salps and pyrosomes, or sea pickles, are both chordates within subphylum Urochordata. Oh no, I think salps are. And then, so a salp is forms these chains of individuals, and so you'll see these many repeating individuals that are all strung together. And they're suspension feeders that go through the water and pump water across a branchial basket that It's basically part of their gills, but also has mucus that allows them to feed. And then pyrosomes are the same as a tunicate, like you would see on the seafloor, but they form this tube-shaped colony, and it's full of little individual zooids that are embedded within the tunic, the sort of matrix that they produce. And they're kind of tube-shaped and kind of lumpy like a pickle, which I think is why they're called sea pickles. But their name, pyrosome, the scientific name, is it's called fire animal, and it's because these guys are very bioluminescent. So if you touch one end of a pyrosome, they'll transmit light from one zooid to another and propagate across the body in these flashes.
Sometimes they'll wash up on beaches.
Yeah, that's right.
Mm-hmm.
There was a big bloom of pyrosomes a few years ago, 2015, I believe. I know we were out in 2015 and 2017, and one of the years there were so many pyrosomes. And so, yeah, they can bloom up in big abundances.
And they're clear.
Pickle shapes.
Yeah, pickle shape.
Mm-hmm. Tubes.
Let's see, what depth are we at right now? Just on here?
Depth is 3174 meters.
All right.
Phaeodarians are amoeboid protists. Looks like their taxonomic placement is kind of up for debate right now. But they're really pretty little plankton. I hope we see some. I saw like one every once in a while we were on the seafloor, just kind of cruising along.
Oh, you did?
I did. That's why I'm like, Phaeodarians, this trip.
All right, well, if you see one next time, I'll point it out.
Okay. Being not a midwater person, no, but I think it's Taylor Ann's. You gave me that pen earlier. Thank you. Taylor Ann, you have a helper working with you.
Yeah, I think Justin brought this little plastic
Ooh, I like
octopus.
that.
Looks like recycled
Oh.
plastic or something. Octopus. It's pretty
Plastic
cool.
octopus.
We have an octopus mascot. And
Yeah.
actually, for you viewers out there, I know that Rebecca Helm, who heads up several large Twitter followings, including the Ocean Exploration, Open Ocean Exploration? I can't remember her Twitter handle now. She was tuning in and was having a lot of Twitter conversations, and she had named our octopus that was on our manipulator arm for several hours Octobuddy, and she was talking about how Octobuddy was involved in all of our science. So that was pretty fun. And Octobuddy, she wrote to me last night, and she wrote on Twitter asking, is Octobuddy still there? And at one point, Octobuddy had shaken loose, and the internet responded to her saying Octobuddy has gone back to her octo brooding ground. So we appreciate Octobuddy's help with our science.
So right now we're seeing marine snow, right?
It's snowing.
It looks like it's snowing.
Yeah.
Well, what is it made out of? It's not really snow, right?
It's not. It's made out of fecal pellets and tissues and scales and dying organisms, small zooplankton.
Yeah.
Right?
I'm sorry, I'm giggling because I was thinking it's not something you want to catch on your tongue like regular snow.
No, but it'll be fun to look under a microscope.
I mean,
Absolutely.
maybe you do if you're a deep water crinoid or something, right?
That's a good point. Yep, they'd be happy to get this.
They're ready. This is their breakfast. It's coming down to them.
So here's a fun thing to try. I have no idea if this is actually going to pan out or be true, but I do know that in general, we say that every 1,000 meters of depth, you lose, or the amount of food that's available is reduced to about 10% of what it was. So we're at 3,000 meters, which means that we're getting probably 1% of whatever amount of food there was at the surface. I'm curious if as we ascend, we're going to see this marine snow as kind of a heavier snowfall or thicker, more snow.
As we get shallower?
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Let's just kind of keep
So
that in mind.
at
as a general
2,000
trend.
meters, we'll check back in.
Yeah.
Okay.
See how we're...
So this is what it looks like now.
We still have we still have Niskins we could fire off and take a sample and and compare it.
I think we'll save those.
Okay.
Thank you.
For shallower depths, or
Mostly I'm just curious with this. I don't think we need to collect for it. Yeah.
Just a curious observation.
We know that in general that's true. So it's just, I've never really looked at ROV video to see if you can see changes in the marine snow as you get shallower. The way that that's often measured is using sediment traps, which are marine snow catchers, kind of like a rain collector. What's that called? Rain gauge. So a sediment trap is an opening, a tube, or sometimes they'll use a funnel, and then as marine snow sinks, it lands in that funnel and gets collected into a jar. And so that jar, you leave it out for, say, 1 year, then the amount of marine snow that you've caught within that jar within the year tells you what and how much marine snow has fallen. And so you can put these sediment traps at different heights above the seafloor or depths, and so you can get kind of a profile that way. You could also have sediment traps with a little bit of, with a few motors and some mechanics or electronics at the bottom that can cycle different jars at the bottom of that funnel over time. And so you could have an estimate then of the changes in marine snow at different times of the year.
Should get like a seasonality maybe,
Mhm.
if it exists.
If it does, which we would see in off of our coast. So in the springtime, the coast of California has wind that blows down the coast, and that causes water to move offshore through a process called hhmm transport. And when that water moves offshore, well, some water has to still fill up what's there by the shore, and so what happens is you have water that's brought up from the deep ocean. And that water is often full of a lot of nutrients that would otherwise be depleted at the surface by phytoplankton. So it's almost like it fertilizes the surface waters and helps phytoplankton then bloom and grow. So if you guys come out to California, don't expect to see tropical turquoise waters like you would see in the tropics. You'd more likely see waters that are brown or green tinged because of the phytoplankton that are growing up. And that's a seasonal thing. So the winds are strong, blowing that direction in the spring. So we get early summer upwelling. And then we'll often have upwelling throughout the summer. And then another big plankton bloom in the fall before it then gets a little bit more nutrient depleted in the wintertime. So sediment trap would catch all that. And we've deployed sediment traps before where even without having to do any kind of measurements or drying the sediments or analysis, we can just visually see that the cups that we're collecting sediment during the spring have way more, double, triple the amount of what we see at other times of the year.
So you would say the spring is a much more productive time for that.
Yes, productivity is what we would call that.
Productivity.
The growth of production of biomass.
So if we were building up those layers of material, is that food for something, or is that how we just sort of continuously build up the seafloor?
It's kind of both.
Kind of both.
Yeah.
All right.
So, yeah, there's probably a lot of, if you were to take a look at the sediments that we collect from the seafloor, they would have clays and silts and small minerals. So that's geological components. But there's also a lot of biogenic material, which is material made by biology, by organisms. So things like the shells and tests of diatoms. Oh, there was a larvation to the right there. Or a sinker.
Or a sinker's house.
Yeah. So larvations are also chordates, urochordates, and they look like a little tadpole, but they have these neat cells on the top of their head that can secrete a mucus, and the cells help kind of shape that mucus, and then they blow the mucus full of water, and it puffs out and expands into what's called a house around them. So it's this mucus house. It's got all these fine meshes on it, and so the larvation can use its tail to draw water through that mucus house and capture marine snow on the meshes of that mucus, and then it can slurp up that, well, it moves the mucus toward its mouth and slurps up that food. But you can imagine that mucus is sticky all over, and so the larvation house gets fouled pretty quickly with other marine snow on the outside. So larvations frequently will shed that mucus house, swim out of it, and produce a new one. And that mucus house then sinks to the seafloor and carries with it a whole bunch of marine snow. So they make the marine snow fall even faster, and it can, if a sea cucumber snuffles along and comes across a discarded mucus house, which we call sinkers, then it gets quite a lot of food in one concentrated area.
And some recent research by Ambari scientists measured that, and a lot more carbon was being delivered to the seafloor than they once thought.
Yeah.
Significantly, because larvations contribute a significant amount of the carbon coming to the seafloor, right?
Yes, yeah, and that sort of discussion was based on how much metabolism or metabolic demand there is on the seafloor. So there are a lot of animals down there, and they're all needing food to survive, and so they measured oxygen respiration as kind of a method of understanding how much metabolism is needed to support that amount of respiration. And then they looked at how much carbon was raining down with marine snow, and there was this discrepancy. So a lot of years it looked like there was not enough food coming down to support the whole deep sea fauna. And it's true that some years are boom and some years are bust in terms of how much food gets down there. But Erica, you're referring to the paper that talked about how much carbon, it turns out, is coming down just by those sinkers, the larvation houses, and how that could make up for a lot of that deficit.
You kind of compare them to spider webs. Spiders spin a web to collect other organisms, and then they eat them.
That right.
Sort of like what the larvation's doing. Creating a web of sorts, a mucus web, to collect their prey or their food.
I think the title of that paper was something like, "Is the deep sea on a diet?" Or that was the one that started to show that discrepancy.
So we're changing our lights, sort of adjusting what's going on. Are these our ascending lights? Are they different than the ones we use at the bottom?
No, they're the same lights. They're just, I'm not really sure. I think YDAM was testing them, but
We're testing lights.
Just testing our lights to see what the fill-in there is in the, like how they hit the porch or the front of the vehicle and where they're filling it.
Do you have different light configurations you would use that's optimized for midwater versus benthic?
Sorry, say again?
Do you have different light configurations for midwater and benthic work?
No, our lights are, we try and spread the lights out so we can have them all on all the time. If we're doing a dive where we know we're going to be on the cliff the whole time, we might tilt them up a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But in general, we try and have, like you see the V there at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
So if all the lights are on, we try and fill in those V's. So when you're looking down, you don't have that in the video. So there's even lighting everywhere on the seabed.
Ah, I see.
And Herc set up pretty good to do even lighting on the seabed or a cliff. we've played with the very outer lights, the downward-looking ones. So we've adjusted these the last few times on deck to try and provide a little bit more light right close to the porch. I don't know if you notice when we get too close to some things, there's a bit of a shadow between the porch. But it's a trade-off because if we have too much light too close to the camera, it lights up all that marine snow that we talk about all the time, and that makes it hard to see what we're looking at.
I see.
So
And I guess
the more snow you're looking through, the more backscatter you get. We worked out at one point how many lumens were on this vehicle, and I forget what it is now.
it's got to be a lot.
A lot.
Yeah, I feel like we're very bright.
Somewhere between 100 and 200, the equivalent of over 100 automobiles with their high beams on.
Ooh,
Wow.
that's
Wow.
very
So
bright.
do
But we
you-
get beautiful views down here, so it's working.
When we're testing on deck, we use sunglasses.
I was going to ask, can you turn on all the lights on deck, or is it just overwhelming?
Yeah, we do them one at a time because if you look at them on deck, you see sunspots for about 10 minutes after that.
Ooh.
And they get hot super fast on deck because they're cooled in the water. So we just turn them on long enough to verify they're working.
I see. And do you use some sort of light meter or sensor when they're out of the water, or is this you've been adjusting them by eye based on what you've seen during the dives, and it needs to be in the water for you to evaluate this, the V's and the dark spaces you're talking about?
It's basically it's a trial and error to get them perfect. And no, we don't use, to my knowledge, any meters or anything.
There's a solstice.
Wayne might.
Yeah.
There's a jelly coming past the lasers right now. That's solstice, I believe.
It's sort of taking a little ride.
Yeah. Might have gotten a little bit of swash from our...
Looks like a round ring. Looks like
I
a
think,
UFO.
the way we operate these lights are in a digital mode. They're either all on or all off. So there's not a lot of calibration to do.
It's the way it should be. I operate my kitchen light the same way. Well, actually, that's not true nowadays. Alexa sets the mood in the kitchen, which I've probably just done to everyone who has one at home. Sorry.
Have our ROV connected to Alexa. Just tell it what to do. I don't think we'd have too many things in the bottom that would try to mess with it, but it'd be very hard to shout all the way down to the bottom of the seafloor.
There's so many things that are blinking and sticking up with antennae off of the ROV. Can you guys talk about what some of those are?
Sorry, say again?
There are all these antennae and blinking lights and sensors on the ROV. Can you talk about what some of those are? Like,
Oh, sure. There's so as far as sensors for operating the ROV, we have one of our main ones is the DVL, which has 4 acoustic beams that hit the seabed. And from that we gain altitude, but also position of the vehicle. There's an octans gyro on there that gives us pitch, roll, and yaw, and gives us acceleration in X, Y, and Z, and some fancy software to tie that with the DVL. Allows us to basically hold position with the vehicle. same as the ship does. That's as long as we're within about 35 meters of the bottom and have all 4 beams returning data. Probably another primary one is our sonar. That's the acoustic forward-looking sonar that lets us see what kind of terrain is coming up. There's an array of sensors on there for the scientists. I have the CTD, which is, I always forget what that stands for.
Conductivity, temperature, and depth.
Conductivity, thank you.
Conductivity is used to measure salinity.
There's 2 compasses on the vehicle. And there's also 2 on Argus. Argus has a sub-bottom profiler that we use as an altimeter mostly. I'm probably missing a whole bunch of them.
I think, how does it, I mean, I'm looking at your your Herc sort of screen, and it tells you how many twists you have in the cable one way or another, the tether. I know you guys always want to have less than 1. But how does the computer know that? Like, is there something sensing tension on the tether, or does it just keep track of your turns for you?
No, it just keeps track of all 3 vehicles and vessels out here. So it knows the ship's heading, it knows Argus heading, and it knows Herc's heading. And it keeps track of all 3 of those with respect to one to another, for example. So if the ship turns 180, that induces 100, half a turn in the down wire in Argus's cable. And the same with Herc or Argus. So we don't want to have any turns in the down wire in the main cable because that can cause mechanical issues, especially at the end of the cable when it all comes back onto the deck.
Kind of like a garden hose with the wrong twists in it.
Exactly. Yeah, you don't want to get a kink in your hose that stops the electrons from flowing through. And it can also cause mechanical issues with the mechanical termination on Argus, and that has to hold, we've seen on this dive upwards of 13,000 pounds. And
what's that, 13,000 pounds of force on that, or you're saying?
Yeah, we have there's a load cell on the winch overboarding sheave. So on the A-frame on the back deck of Nautilus, there's a load cell in there that monitors the weight on that wire, and the safe working load of the wire is around 14,000 pounds, and braking strength is obviously probably triple that. But what happens if it gets too much tension, it will damage the fiber optic cables in there or the electrical high voltage wires, and the lights will go out in the control room. And there's also a mechanical termination there that is meant to take that that load. So if you spin it, it can be like, we'll get the coat hanger effect. If you bend a coat hanger a whole bunch of times, it will weaken it and eventually break. And then the cable between Argus and Hercules has, we're very painful to make sure that that has no turns in it because it will tangle like a phone cord will, or like a hose when you pull it out without unwrapping it. And it also has a recovery line that's daisy chained to it. So one of the things that we do on a launch is kind of do this sewing machine action, and we mate a 1/4 inch line along the tether, and then if you watch the recovery, that line is tied off to Argus. So once Argus is on deck, somebody physically goes out there and grabs a hold of that line and pulls on it, and all the knots come out along the way, and then that's attached to the crane, and the crane pulls in on that 1/4 inch line, which eventually turns into a 3/8 line, which turns into a 1/2 inch line, and that's the eventual line that lifts Hercules out of the water. So if there's a turn in that line becomes wrapped around the tether, which makes it impossible to lift Hercules out of the water. So.
Right.
So not only do they have to deal with like the pressure, but they have those cables have to be able to sort of pick up our ROVs out of the water. So they've got that fiber optic cable on the inside, and then sort of a steel titanium structure on the outside.
It's a steel wire. The down cable's made out of some super hard steel. You could take a hacksaw and cut on it for days, and you would probably not even scratch it.
Wow.
But a grinder will go through it in a heartbeat. And then the cable between Argus and Hercules is a soft cable or an aramid cable. So it has Kevlar, a weave of Kevlar inside it that protects the inner cable that carries the high voltage and the fiber optic signals back and forth.
That's amazing. So that probably weighs a whole lot when we pull it all into the ship.
The cable weighs approximately 1 kilogram per meter.
Whoa.
So 1,000
So we had
meters out,
3,000.
so is 1 metric ton. Yeah. So
Yeah.
we have 3,000
Oh man.
kilos hanging over the back of the ship at this depth.
How do we not just get pulled into the ocean?
Yeah. So when all of the equipment on the deck has a safe working load, and all the welds are periodically inspected, and they're actually certified as a lifting device, and it's something that has to be maintained and checked. And then there's dynamic parts that, there's bearings and stuff like that that has to be maintained to take those loads.
So you guys are our pilots. Are you the ones doing all of this?
That we are. This is the luxury part of the job, the easy part of the job.
So sitting here piloting, you would say, is the easy part.
Yeah,
That's impressive. A lot of people are very impressed by how you're able to manipulate these things. So tell us a little bit more about the other things you do to maintain these ROVs and make sure they're ready to go. I know we're ascending now. You guys, that means you're in for some more work, right? We're going to pull these up, and then you guys got to make sure they're ready to go for the next dive.
Yeah, typically our turnaround time on deck is about 4 hours if we're hustling the whole time. So one of the first things that happens once we safely get it on deck and secure it on deck is what we call the science swarm. So there's a lot of very keen scientists that have some treasures on Herc, and they have to come out and get all those samples off the vehicle in an orderly fashion. So that takes some help from us to safely open up the sample drawers and secure the high voltage and make sure it's safe to come up to the vehicle. And then
As a scientist, I appreciate being called a science swarm. That's great.
yeah, it's we have a time lapse of it. It's pretty funny. There's I don't know, probably half a dozen kids out there at least, and maybe more. And so once they pack all their samples off, then some of the things, for example, the suction jars where we took a sample earlier, those are eventually returned to us, and usually they're in a state where we can put them back on the vehicle, but sometimes we have to, we'll help them out by rinsing everything out. For example, the Niskins all need to get fresh water rinsed, and all the jars need to get rinsed. The push core that we took, that will need to be cleaned and then reattached to the vehicle and set up in such a fashion where it doesn't collapse on the way down, and it's secure on the way down, and there's no contamination from the last dive. So just turning the science gear around is a bit of work, and then there's all the post-dive checks that we do is just a maintenance list to check all the mechanical bits on the vehicle, all the electrical bits, check all the compensation oils is probably the biggest one. So there's, I don't know, at least a dozen quick disconnect fittings on the vehicle, so we take an oil sample out of every single device that's on the vehicle, all the valve packs, all the J-boxes, the thruster bearings, the main working hydraulic oil. And we check all that to make sure that there's been no water ingress. And then we have to put more compensation fluid back in and make sure they're at the proper levels to be able to go down to 3,000 meters. Too much compensation oil and things can, well, they can literally blow up, which is a make work day for us. And not enough.
That'd be bad.
If there's not enough compensation oil in there, the compensators get too low and we would have to abort the dive and recover the deck. So we're pretty methodical about making sure all those levels are correct. And we have to make sure there's no air entrapped in any of the systems. So there's a lot of plumbing on Herc and Argus. So we go around and air bleed all the compensated electrical and mechanical devices. And geez, what else do we, I don't know, we have a checkoff list. It's called pre-dives and post-dives, so that's probably an hour worth of work.
It sounds like it. So you guys have, I mean, your engineering talents, so you've got some plumbing, you've got some electrical work. What other sort of things do you have to cover as a pilot?
One of the things that we agonize over is when the scientists bring us a milk crate full of delicate instruments, and we have to integrate that to the front of the vehicle in such a fashion that we can run it down 3 kilometers. So it has to live through the interface, so the violence of picking the thing up with a crane and throwing it over the side of the ship in 2 to 3 meter seas, and then running it down 3,000 meters through the water column, and then delicately deploying it on the side of a cliff into a crevice. So we have to make sure it's situated in such a fashion that we can grab things with our manipulator in the right order and deploy them without damaging the equipment or either the science equipment or our equipment. So we agonize over that quite a bit to like one tie wrapper, one rubber band can cause us hours of grief on the bottom.
Like those really strong rubber bands on the Osmo samplers.
Exactly.
Those were impressive.
That we probably spent 10 minutes trying to defeat a rubber band. And so one of the things we'll do is we'll just take a pair of side cutters and put the tiniest of nick in the rubber band to put a weak spot in it. And same with a cable tie. And if a cable tie is tying a cable against a hard surface, you can pull on it and it will break. But if it's tying another cable, we can't really, grab a cable with our manipulator. So it took us probably 2 days to rig the porch for the first deployment.
And now we
Gotcha.
have
So
4
you really have to plan ahead with everything that's going on. But there is some sort of interchangeability on Herc that allows us to do different sort of sampling methods, right? Because we've had squeeze bottles, we've deployed temperature probes. So we have all sorts of variabilities that we can use Hercules for, even if it challenges our engineers to make sure that it all works out and fits on our front porch.
Dan, could we cycle power to that temperature DO probe again?
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, Hercules is a bit like a Lego set in some aspects. There's an infinite amount of possibilities. And then if you look in the ROV shop, there's literally a whole wall of gadgets and tools, and then also hidden in lots of totes stored up on the wall is different stuff that we route through to make our Swiss Army knife ready for the next dive. My favorite one is what does Sam call it? She's got an acronym for the...
Oh, the brush.
Yeah, the brush.
What is it? What is
Yeah,
it?
the TBOS, is that right?
Toilet brush of science.
Yes.
T-boss.
The T-boss, that's it.
T-boss. That's it. Toilet
T-boss.
brush of science. What
So
does our toilet brush of science do?
the T-boss is a good example. So it's literally a toilet brush, but we've modified it with a special handle that can we can grab with the manipulator. And most everything we have also has a monkey fist on it, which is it's a special knot that's tied in a ball. And historically, it's used for a heaving line. For when the ship ties up, they throw the monkey fist across to the dock on a small line, and then they pull the big hawser lines across to tie the vessel up.
On a cruise where I was a contracting scientist, we also had something called the wham stick, which I don't think we're allowed to use anymore. We got a cease and desist, but it was a wiffle-assisted measurement. So it was a stick with a ball at the end of a known diameter, so that we could stick it out there and take pictures and, you know, add scale to the image without, you know, the lasers were ineffective on sort of getting scale on fan corals. And so we developed this little stick with the ball at the end that had a known diameter, and we could pull scale from that later. I don't think that's around. I think that's still in my old lab.
That reminds me, we have some toys on the front porch that we probably should think about securing for recovery.
Like their Optode.
Yeah, there's a priceless sensor laying there on the front porch. There's also the
Our stowaway is waving at us.
the accumulator. Is the stowaway still on board?
I think that's one of his arm, one of her arms waving.
Oh yeah, she's still there.
Oh, she's all curled up in her coil.
Yeah.
Oh, we'll see how she fares. She's going to deal with a large temperature and pressure change, so that's difficult for these animals to handle.
Yeah. Well, normally thing that don't make the ascent up and stay on board because of the sloshing around we do on the surface. That is one of the things that clears it off, but that looks pretty entangled into the air, the temperature probe line. I think that has a good chance of making it on board.
Looped around.
Yeah.
So who came up with the name the front porch? I think that's a great idea.
I'm not sure where that comes from. It's that particular front porch we call our engineering porch because it's twice as big as our normal front porch. So milk crate width or milk crate length.
Put all of our scientist equipment on there and be ready to go.
How will you guys secure like the squeeze samplers from, you know, not falling out of the milk crate when you're at the surface with all that turbulence?
Yeah, so we obviously talk about all that before we put it in the water,
Yeah.
and the determination there was that they're heavy enough to stay in there.
Okay.
But if they were lighter objects, we would have a highly technical array of bungee cords and carabiners that we would use the manipulators to tie it in as best we can.
Yeah, I've also seen them with some science. They hold it down with Mongo. They just rest the arm on top. So.
The weight of that keeps it from moving around or
Well,
shifting.
not just the weight, but once the Mongo arm is stowed, it is immovable. So it's not just its weight. So
It's just going to stay there and hold on to it for us.
It stays where you leave it. So that's with with lots of hydraulic pressure, I'm sure. It doesn't move easily.
Gotcha. Well, while I'm bothering you guys as our pilots, there is a cool looking arm thing sitting here in front of our co-pilot that manipulates the Predator arm. And I think that is just amazing. Can you tell us a little bit more about how that works? And then maybe about how you learned how to use it, because it seems tricky.
Sure, yeah. The basically it's a miniature replica of the Predator arm on Hercules. So it's the system is to have a technical mouthful is a spatially correspondent 7-function manipulator. So the master arm drives the slave arm, and basically they mimic the motion of each other. So it has the same degrees of freedom that the slave arm has. So it has an azimuth, a shoulder, an elbow, a pitch, and a yaw function, and has a wrist roll function in the jaw. And then there's an array of buttons on the end that control, we can either spin the wrist continuously or run it in position mode, which is basically, we can run it like a drill or run it like your own wrist.
Is it possible for you to demonstrate it on the camera, or?
Anatella would love to. She's, that's her toy now.
Okay. So on set feed 2 on the quad view, he's gonna, I'll have the camera inside the lab is over your left shoulder, so over your right shoulder, sorry. So let's see if
You went a little late.
Oh yeah.
yeah. It actually.
How's that?
That's good. You want me to actually move the arm?
Well, I was just to demonstrate the controller, actually, not to
Controller.
actually move the arm.
Okay.
So if you could put it here,
Okay.
so I could get it on the camera. There you go. And then just kind of explain that as you manipulate it, what you would be controlling.
Sure.
So that arm's a bit of a technological nightmare in itself. It has 57 wires that travel up to the thing. Each of the joints is motorized, so we can actually, if we want to, we can turn on what we call force feedback. So it jumps around in your hand as we pick up weight or press against a rock or something with the arm. But it's basically a replica of the slave arm, as I mentioned. So as we manipulate it around, the Predator arm moves in a like fashion.
Mm-hmm. And that's how they control the arm.
That is so neat.
Cool.
So that has sensors in it, obviously, to sense its position. It also has some strain gauges in it to it can sense the force that we're applying to the master arm.
And how do you open and close the hand or the claw?
We have a squeezy trigger here.
Oh, there's buttons.
Buttons.
Yeah.
So it can kind of like read the pressure off of you, or is it more of like adjusting a dial? How does it know, or how do you know how much force?
So it has strain gauges in each of the joints, along with the motor. So it can feel how much we're pressing against the motor. It kind of needs that, so as the motor in there is meant to telegraph the forces that are being sensed on the arm to us. It also works the other way. So it's the other long term is bilateral force feedback, so it can sense both ways. So in theory, you could grab the end of the manipulator with your hand and drive it around, and the master arm will actually lift itself and move around in reverse, which is really wild and dangerous. I wouldn't advise it. But
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Oh, that is super cool. Such a fascinating way to be able to manipulate the arm, because it does have so many joints to effectively make that happen.
yeah, each one has a sensor and feedback wires, as we call them. So some of the maintenance we have to do is make sure all those are happy and working correctly and calibrated.
If you had to calibrate your, what would you call it, a mini arm?
Correct, yeah, you see there's an array of buttons on that thing, and you have to have a PhD to know what they all do. But
Yeah, it certainly seems like a challenge to learn. When you're learning to be a pilot, what's some of the first things you start with and then you work up to?
the manual, read the manual.
Read the manual. I feel like I've heard that before.
Oh my gosh, I'm a total manual reader. My PhD advisor used to give me a hard time about it, and then she decided she would just outsource the knowledge to me. She'd say, hey, the manual, huh? What did the manual say about this? Now she reads manuals. I'm so happy.
There you go. They're incredibly
Great.
useful. They do explain everything of how it
does
works.
help to understand how something works first.
Yeah, I think everybody in this room is probably all cut sheet junkies, so we spend a lot of time reading.
I think so. I think so.
You have to the people that specialize in a given field, whether it's an animal or a mechanical device, they have they're a lot more familiar with it and the intimate knowledge that they have, so we simply have to do due diligence and read all about it, and that helps us do our job.
Absolutely learn about it, keep up with the new information, see how people are learning different parts and different things. Yeah, I definitely think this group of us is avid readers. Always thirsty for more knowledge and seeing how we can do our jobs better and seeing what more we can learn. I mean, you guys are joining us here and we're exploring the bottom of the ocean, so we're always out to, our curiosity is always there.
Yeah, it's really where it all comes together. We get to, when we walk into this room, we get to apply all that. So, and then when we walk away, we have 100 more questions than we walked in with. So,
it's always the case with science, and I feel like sometimes it's frustrating, and sometimes it's so exciting to be able to realize what we've accomplished. And I mean, it doesn't seem like a short dive, but a 35 hour dive, we've learned so many new things, and we can process those and, of course, continue to ask more questions.
oh, we got to see baby octopuses being born. That was
So cool. It's definitely an experience I don't think I'll forget.
And being made.
And being made? Baby
Yeah.
octopuses being made?
Yeah.
Absolutely. To see those interactions between octopods is unique. Very cool. Well, I've got one more question for you guys pilots before I pick somebody else to bother. How did you get started? What was your favorite part about getting started and moving through the process? And what is your least favorite part about what you do now?
So, yeah, going to school to learn the technical bits is the start. And for me, I was lucky enough to work for a manufacturer of this equipment. So I got to work with an army of engineers, and I was a technician putting the stuff together and testing it. And getting to work through the design, development, test, and maintenance of it. And then I got hooked on the operation of it, and kind of came to the dark side, as they say. I kind of missed the engineering and manufacturing environment, but the operations are much much more fun. It kind of gets in the blood a little. That's my short story.
It's a good one.
Yeah, so I have a background in robotics and computer science and some mechanical engineering, which is sort of my engineering foundation. And last year I was an intern, which is how I got started on the piloting and operations side. I'm learning the vehicle systems, and now I'm coming back and still learning a ton. Sure, I will be learning a ton every minute I'm on this ship. So that's been a really great experience.
Very cool. Thank you, guys. It seems like such an interesting job. I didn't know there were so many other components to it, not only driving the ROV, but all of the maintenance, the calibration, make sure we're ready to go. It takes a lot of planning ahead of time. You guys will, you can teach me really quick, right? No big deal?
Yeah. Of course.
Sounds like it takes a few years of schooling, but it is a very cool career path. So who should we ask about their career next? Anyone volunteering? All right, then I'm gonna start picking our scientist brains. Scientists, are you still with us?
Yeah, this is Erica Burton.
All right.
How I got started? So, how I got interested is when I was out of high school doing undergraduate work, my dad wanted to learn how to scuba dive, and he said, "You're going to come with me." I said, "Okay." So I got certified probably when I was 18 or 19, and two of my friends joined, and then I got turned on to the undersea world and scuba diving out of Monterey. That's where I got certified. And then while I was an undergraduate, I took a marine biology class, and that really turned me on to it. And then that professor said, "Hey, Erica, you should take my botany class," because that was his specialty. And I never knew botany could be so interesting.
What is botany? Tell us a little bit more.
The study of plants.
Study of plants. So plants are
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't stay with plants. I went to to marine science, but so then I decided, well, I'm going to major in marine biology. So I went down, I got my undergraduate degree at Cal State Long Beach. And then I got really interested in fishes, probably through scuba diving.
Yes, definitely my love.
Yeah, and as a marine scientist, you really can't do much with just a bachelor's degree. So my ichthyology professor said, "Hey, Erica, you got to go to Moss Landing Marine Labs." He knew a lot of professors there, and he went to grad school with Greg Kaye, who was an ichthyology professor at Moss Landing Marine Labs. He goes, "You should apply." So I did, and I got in, and then I moved up to Monterey Bay Area and went to school at Moss Landing Marine Labs. I got a graduate degree, a master's degree in marine science. And my specialty at the time for my thesis was looking at the age and growth of fishes. I started with the giant grenadier. So we've been seeing grenadier down here, different species, but we will see giant grenadier in shallower depths. And then I also did the age and growth work for Atlantic tarpon through a contract, Atlantic sturgeon through a contract, and then also Boccaccio off the coast of California. And by studying the age and growth of fishes is their ear bones, which they use to, I'll say loosely here, but to get balance in the water column, grows rings like a tree does. If you've ever seen a tree and you slice it open, you'll see rings and you can count them to get at an age. Well, the same thing can sort of be done with fishes. And the ear bones are small. They're probably the size of your fingernail. And we slice them, and then we put them under a microscope, and we count the rings. But we have to figure out, what does a ring mean? Does a ring mean a year? Does it mean a month? Does it mean a week? And to get at the periodicity of the annual growth rings, we looked we use naturally occurring radioactive elements that actually are laid down in their otolith, their ear bone. And we know the decay rate of radioactive, and these are naturally occurring radioactive elements or isotopes. And radium lays down